Hey there, class. Mr. Pusky here. Hope you're having a good day so far. We're continuing with Chapter 9, and Chapter 9 is all about radicals and roots and quadratics. And quadratics are basically, they make a graph that looks like a parabola, and basically if you were to throw a ball in the air and let it kind of follow its trajectory, it will make a parabola, and that's kind of like what gravity does to a ball. It makes a parabolic shape. So we're going to be working with quadratic equations, and quadratic equations, a parabola or quadratic equation, equation makes a parabola, and quadratic equations are basically polynomials that are to the second power, okay? So if you have like x squared, plus 2x minus 4, that's going to be a quadratic equation because it's to the second power, okay? So our essential question is, how do we solve quadratic equations? How do we manipulate expressions with radicals? Okay, so let's get right into this here. So, square root. It says square root, it's kind of hard to see, but if b squared equals a, then b is the square root of a. So, for example, if we have 3 squared equals 9, then 3 equals the square root of 9. So it's saying what number squared is a, and the opposite of that, or the inverse of that, is saying what number times itself twice is going to be the 9, and in this case it would be 3. Okay? So that's the square root. It's what number times itself equals what's under the radical. And the word radicand is the expression that's inside a square root symbol. So in this case, the square root of 9 is the radicand. Okay? All right. So it says, next thing we have here is all positive real numbers have 2 square roots. We have a positive square root and a negative square root, okay? All right. And it says to ask for both square roots, you're going to use the plus or minus symbol. Plus or minus is what you're going to use to represent positive and negative square roots. If you do the square root of 16 on your calculator, the square root of 16 on your calculator is just going to be 4. It's not going to give you plus or minus 4, okay? Because the square root is an operation like adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. Could you imagine if you did, 4 plus 2 and it gave you 6 sometimes and it gave you like 8 some other times? That would be an issue, right? So because the square root is an actual operation like addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division, it needs to end up with one result. It needs to have one result, or else it would cause chaos in the math world, okay? So when you do the square root of a positive number, you're only going to get the positive square root, because that's just what they defined square root to do. But when you have something like x squared equals 25, it's saying what number squared are 25? Well, you can have x equals 5, or x equals negative 5, right? Both 5 and negative 5 squared equals 25, okay? So if you're just doing the square root of a number, you're going to have just the positive number. But if you're taking the square root and you're solving for x squared, something like that, you're going to have to do plus or minus 5. So this would be x equals plus or minus 5, okay? We'll talk more about that in a little while here, though, okay? And then we have our perfect squares. Perfect squares are numbers whose square roots are whole numbers. Okay, so for example, perfect would be like 1, 4, 9, 16, because the square root of 1 is 1, the square root of 4 is 2, the square root of 9 is 3, the square root of 16 is 4, dot, 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 dot. So those numbers go on forever, but those are numbers that are, so you'll have a perfect square card that you'll be able to use. And numbers, when you take the square root of them, they come out to a nice whole number. That's going to be a perfect square. And all other numbers that are not perfect squares, when you take the square root, are going to be irrational numbers. So the square root of 13 is a irrational number because you can't write it as a fraction. And also, 13 is not a perfect square, so when you take the square root, it's not going to come out to a nice whole number. Okay? And irrational numbers are numbers that cannot be written as a quotient of 2 integers. Basically, you can't write it as a fraction, okay? Because rational means that you can write it as a fraction. Irrational means you can't write it as a fraction. All right, let's go ahead and get in some problems here. So it says, find all square roots of the numbers or write no square roots. Okay, let's get right into this. Well, you can see if you can give these a try, and we'll go through them in a second. All right, we need the square root of 25 first. What's the square root of 25? It's just 5. It's not plus or minus 5 because we're just doing the square root of a positive number. We're not solving an x squared problem, okay? It's not saying what number squared are 25. It's just saying find the square root of 25. All right, number 2, square root of 0.49. Well, that's really close to 49. The square root of 49 is 7. So in this case, the answer is going to be 0.7. You can use a calculator for these. Okay. Number 3, square root of negative 81. Go ahead and plug that into your calculator really quick. See what you get. Plug in the square root of negative 81. What do you get for an answer? Well, you should have gotten something like undefined or something weird on your calculator that's not going to work. And the reason why is we cannot take a square root of a negative number. It's saying what number times itself is going to give you negative 81. Well, it looks like we know 9 times 9 equals 81, but also negative 9 times negative 9 equals positive 81. So there is no way we can multiply the same number times itself to end up with a negative under a radical. So it's called an imaginary number, and we're going to talk about those more in Algebra 2, but not for now, okay? So whenever you see you're taking the square root of a negative number, that's going to be no real solution. So in this case, it's going to be no real solution. There's an imaginary solution, but we're not going to cover that in Algebra 1, okay? So square root of negatives you can't do as of right now in Algebra 1. But number 4 is a little bit different. The negative is outside the radicals. What's the square root of 121? Well, if you look on your perfect card, square root of 121 is going to be 11. The negative is outside the square root. This one's going to be negative 11. All right. Square root of 36 is an easy one. 6 times 6 is 36. Good. And then we have plus or minus square root of 144. Square root of 144 is 12. The plus or minus is outside the radical, so we get plus or minus 12. All right, sounds good. Moving on, radical expressions. It says radical expression is an expression involving square roots. A square root is a grouping symbol, so operations inside the square root must be performed first. You're going to treat radicals like grouping symbols, like parentheses or brackets or fraction bars, okay? So it says, example 2 says x squared, square root of x squared plus xy when x equals 4 and y equals 5. So all we're going to do is we're going to do examples A and C together, and then you guys will try B and D on your own. Actually, we'll do A and D together probably. See how it goes. All right, so we have the square root of x squared plus xy. Well, x equals 4, so I'm literally going to take wherever I see an x, I'm going to replace it with a 4 with it. Replace it with a 4, that is. So we have plus, and then x is 4 still, and then y was 5. Okay, now we got to simplify under the radical. So do we do 4 squared first or 4 times 5 first? We do 4 squared first because that's exponents come first in PEMDAS, right? Or PEMDAS. Okay, I'm actually going to do 4 times 5 as well to kind of save us some time here. So we got 16 plus 20. What's 16 plus 20? Well, that's 36. And square root of 36 equals 6. Not plus or minus 6. They just gave us the positive for this one. All right, why don't you see if you can try example B on your own. We're plugging in A equals 7, B equals 8, and C equals 1. See if you can simplify that on your own. All right, let's go through it. So we have the square root of B squared. So B squared is B is 8, so we have 8 squared in parentheses. Minus 4 times A, which is 7, times C, which is 1. Simplify now. So now we have 8 squared as exponents come first is 64. Minus negative 4 times 7 times 1 is negative 28. And 64 minus 28 is 36. And the square root of 36 equals 6. Kind of ended up being the same thing as the previous problem. Okay, now let's talk about numbers C and D here. All right, C and D. I think we'll do D together, and you guys will try C on your own, okay? So for example, D, we have 1 plus or minus. Also, let me go back to this here. This example here, the square root of b squared minus 4ac is going to be very important for what we're going to talk about later called the quadratic formula. So it's very important that you know how to plug stuff into b squared minus 4ac, okay? It's going to be part of a song I'm going to sing for you, and it's going to be really important. So, and also down here, these couple ones are going to be important for the quadratic formula as well, okay? Which is an important topic. So we have 1 plus or minus 2 square root of 6 over 4. So I'm literally going to split this up. We have 1 plus 2 square root of 6 over 4, and we have 1 that's going to equal, actually we're going to do approximately down here. We also have 1 minus 2 square root of 6 all over 4. Okay, so the way you plug this into your calculator, I'm going to show you over here, is we're going to do parentheses 1 plus, this is how you do it on your calculator, okay? Square root, it's going to be parentheses 6. You're going to have to close parentheses under the radical and close parentheses on top, and then divide by 4. So you're literally just going to plug that into your calculator, but be careful. Make sure you group the entire top, or else it's going to divide. If you don't group the top and you do 1 plus 2 square root of 6 and then divide by 4, it's just going to divide these two. It's not going to divide the whole top. It's only going to divide square root of 6 divided by 4, which is going to mess you up. Okay, so be careful. Make sure you do it the way that I wrote it down here, where you do parentheses around the top to kind of group the numerator together, okay? So if we do that, we should get approximately, the first one should be approximately 1.47, round to the nearest hundredth spot. And the bottom down here, if you do one, same thing, but you do parentheses 1 minus 2 square root of parentheses 6, close parentheses, divide by 4. That's going to be approximately negative 0.97. Okay? All right, so that's kind of how you plug in stuff into your calculator here. And actually, we'll do example C together here. There's actually a little bit of a shortcut that's going to make it easier than using a calculator. You can still use a calculator, but it's going to make your life a lot easier to do this, okay? So let's simplify this first before we do anything, because we can actually simplify under the radical first, right? So we have 3 plus or minus, what's 10 minus 6 going to be? That's square root of 4, right, over 2. And what's the square root of 4? That's actually another number we know. Square root of 4 is 2. So we have 3 plus or minus 2, all divided by 2. Okay, now we can split this up. Now we can do 3 plus 2 over 2 and 3 minus 2 over 2. Well, what's 3 plus 2? That's going to be 5. And what's 5 divided by 2? Well, I'm going to leave it as 5 over 2 because that's going to be the most accurate answer. And what's 3 minus 2 divided by 2? Well, that's 1/2. So we get 5 over 2 and 1/2 are going to be our answers for that one. Okay, so see if you can simplify first before you plug it in. And make sure you split it up, okay? If it's after you get it all simplified, you split it into plus and minus, and then you go from there, okay? But you may get to something like this where you split it up and you can't really do square root of 6. Square root of 6 doesn't simplify nicely, so you're just going to plug that into your calculator the way it is, okay? All right, sounds good. Quadratic equations now. It says quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where a is the leading coefficient and a does not equal 0. And sometimes if b equals 0, the equation is going to become ax squared plus c equals 0. Okay? All right, so here's the steps for solving quadratics. Just like when we're solving equations, you want to isolate the x squared term on one side and then take the square root of both sides. So basically, you're going to get x by itself, and then you're going to take the square root once it's all by itself. Okay? And it says when you use square roots to solve, you get two answers. You're going to have a positive or a negative answer. Okay, so this is what I was talking about. When you take the square root of x squared, you're going to need to do plus or minus when you're solving these. Okay? So make sure you keep that in mind. All right, we got a few more examples to do here. Let's go ahead and do it. Let's go ahead and do. We'll do A and D together, and you guys will try. We'll go through. Just if you want to, we'll do one example together, and if you want to try a couple on your own, that's totally fine. But we're probably gonna do A and C together, possibly. I think. No, we'll do B and C together. Okay, so we have, first one we have is x squared equals 7. All right, first things first, is the x squared by itself on one side of the equal sign? The answer is yes. Okay, good. So now we need to take the square root of x squared. So we're going to do square root of both sides. And we need x equals, we need plus or minus. Now, can we do the square root of 7? Is that a nice number or no? Well, 7 is not a perfect square, so we're going to just keep it as square root of 7. Or you can do an approximation. I like the exact answer the best because it's more accurate. But you can also do the approximation. If you do the square root of 7 on both sides, you're going to get, or the square root of 7, you're going to get approximately 2.65. Okay, so these are your answers. So the top one is the most accurate answer, and the bottom one is an approximation, which is still pretty good, but not as accurate. All right, let's do letter C together now. We have 12x squared minus 60 equals 0. So first things first, is the x squared by itself? It is not. So if I just had 12x minus 60 equals 0, how would I solve that? What would be the first step? Well, I'm going to add 60 to both sides, right? I'm going to get the 12x by itself. So we're going to add 60 to both sides. So now I have 12x squared equals 60. Okay. Now the 12x squared is alone on one side, but we need to get rid of that 12 to get the x squared by itself. How do I get rid of multiplying by 12? Well, I'm going to divide by 12 on both sides. So I get x squared equals, and what's 60 divided by 12? Well, that's going to be 5. Okay. Now, is the x squared all by itself? It is. So what's the last step after we get x squared by itself? We take the square root of both sides. So we're going to get x equals, do we need plus or minus? We do. We need plus or minus. It's saying what number times itself equals 5? Well, you have the square root of 5 and the negative square root of 5 are both going to work. And if you do an approximation, because 5 is not a perfect square, it's going to be an irrational number. We're going to get plus or minus. The square root of 5 is approximately 2.24. And this is our answer. Okay, I know these answers didn't turn out very nicely. You won't always get a decimal or a weird result, but in this case, that's what we ended up with. All right, see if you can do examples A and D on your own now. Give them a try. All right, welcome back. Let's do letter A. Letter A should be a pretty easy one. Is the x squared all by itself on one side? It is. So how do we undo squaring x squared? We need to take the square root of both sides. So x is going to be equal to plus or minus. Well, what's the square root of 16? That's an actually nice number. That's going to be plus or minus 4. So we get our answer is plus or minus 4. And there's our answer. All right, in D, I kind of threw you a curveball here. This one's going to come out to a weird result, but let's go through this together first. Is the x squared alone on one side right now? It is not. How do we get rid of that minus 7? We're going to add 7 to both sides. So we're going to get x squared. Negative 25 plus 7 is negative 18. All right, now we need to get rid of that squared on the x. We need to take the square root of both sides. But now we have x equals the square root of negative 18. Can we do the square root of a negative number or no? Nope. So we're going to write, if there's a square root of a negative number, we're going to write no real solution. And this is our answer. All right. And that's it for today. I think you guys probably did a nice job. Thank you for watching. Have a great day, and we will talk soon.